Morning, everyone.
There.
Hey, how's it going? Awesome. Cool. So I'm trialing a little bit of a new tech setup. So if at any point today you can't hear me very well, if you need volumes adjusted, or you're experiencing a bit of lag that might not be your internet connection, do let me know in the chat and I can tweak things a little. Um, Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Hillary. I've been coming to Creative Morning Sessions for a little while now, and it was such an honor to be asked to speak. So I'm really excited. So what I'm going to do is do a little tweak of my screen here to show you. There we go. Perfect. Um, so today you might like to make sure you're on speaker view for most of when I'm talking, just because I'm probably going to do this speaker in a box thing. Um, I was reflecting on the theme of transit, and it's actually incredibly appropriate because I live right behind Eagle Junction Station, and I'm literally looking out my window, which overlooks the station. I can see all the trains going past. And I imagine for a lot of us, this is a time where we haven't been as active in traveling. And um, I started scrolling back through my phone's photos to look for a few pretty photos of being in transit or modes of transport to share with you today. And there was something I noticed. I noticed that a lot of the photos that I had of transport were not of daily commutes or regular modes of transport. I was only taking photos of unusual trips, big trips. Um, and yeah, I was taking photos if I was going somewhere for the first time. So I'd like to ask you all to reflect a little bit on the last time that you were in transit. Perhaps this morning you travelled to Nime to get your coffee and your brekkie and watch today's stream. Or perhaps you've started going back to work in the office. I know a lot of us are still, part from home and part in the office. Perhaps it's been longer than that. So just have a think about the last time you were in transit and what mode of transport you were on, um, and where you were going and what you were thinking about. What did you notice? Were you aware of your surroundings? Were you aware of the sounds around you? Were you listening to music? Were you on your phone? Were you aware of the people around you? Um, and this photo here is obviously Brisbane Airport. It was just before I headed off to the US for the first time last year, which was pretty fun. So I kept scrolling through photos and I found this one, another, whoops, we'll go back, um, another airplane photo just above beautiful Brisbane. And the only one I could find of me on a mode of transport was this one, which is from the New York City subway on that very trip. Uh, you can see that my friends and I look both excited and maybe a little nervous. And the reason for that is because we just missed our coach from Port Authority that was meant to take us to North Adams, Massachusetts, and we were legging it through the subway to get to Penn Station to make the train in time, because otherwise we were going to miss the first day of the festival that we were meant to be at. So that was a memorable experience of being in transit. And I guess it really made me think about other really memorable trips for me. And I wonder if you can think back to your earliest memory of being in transit as well. Perhaps it was getting a bus to school. Perhaps it was being in a really long car trip with your siblings and your parents. Um, so I'm just going to switch over and show you a little video that I found. I asked my parents to have a dig around in their archives, and I came across this. Let's see if I can get this lined up. Okay, I'm not going to play all of it, but I thought this was quite amazing. Let me know if the volume's okay. So this is a very young Flora in Hong Kong at the age of about 3. And my parents had a little, home video camera, and they took some footage of us preparing to migrate to Australia to live here. So I feel incredibly lucky, I think, that this was actually documented. My dad asking me what I'm doing, and my mum saying that we're looking at the menu. And I guess I'm going to switch back now. I think that's enough of that. One sec. While I get this video back on. I don't need that. Here we go. Okay. So I guess it really, like watching that video, it made me think a lot about what I was noticing at that age, what things I was really remembering as well. Because I have to say, I don't remember a lot of that trip. Certainly, I think, watching videos of yourself when you're young is quite strange, because it feels like some of the things are memories, but also you don't know if you're just creating that in your head as well. But I definitely do remember arriving in Brisbane and a sort of hotel or motel that we were staying at. And I remember my parents letting me drink a little bit of tea, which was quite unusual because I was only 3 and they tried not to let me have caffeine. Um, and reflecting on being in transit and what it feels like to be in transit, it really got me thinking about how much I was noticing when it was the first time, because I have to say, I usually, these days, I don't fly very much, but in a normal year, I might make, 5 to 6 trips, like flights, at least around the country, if not overseas, a year. And it's those trips that really stick out, or long drives. I've had the pleasure of driving all the way out west to Quilpie in Queensland and up to Mount Isa. And those are the trips I remember, ones that are unusual. And I think when you're on heading to a new destination or on a new mode of transport that you haven't been on, it really, you're really in a state of heightened awareness and responsiveness to what's around you, that perhaps, on your daily commute on the bus or on the train, that, you're probably not. I have to say, if I'm thinking back to my last commute on the train, even though it's been a while since I've regularly commuted on the train, I still tend to switch off when I'm on the train. I listen to music, I listen to podcasts. So that made me think a little bit. Then let me see if I can switch this over. The idea of being in transition or in transit in terms of my career. So we'll fast forward 15 to 20 years, and I'm doing a classical music degree at the University of Queensland. I, was a good student at school and enjoyed playing the violin because it was something that I both enjoyed learning and sharing with others. I enjoyed playing in the school string orchestra and, having friends in that group. And so I decided to study music, which is a little unusual and a bit unexpected for my parents, I think. I'm sure they thought I was going to go study medicine. But luckily they were pretty supportive and decided, well, I guess that's what she's going to do. And it was a really great time for me studying, actually. It When you study music, especially in a classical music environment, it's a fairly small community and tight knit community. You have all these mentors and peers around you who are all very passionate about the same thing. A lot of your peers in terms of other students are, learning the same repertoire as you and discovering it for the first time. Maybe some of them might come from very musical families, but for me, it was very much a sense of discovering a lot of new music all the time because I was really immersing myself in this world. Um, and they're not just passionate about the art form, they're really passionate about the craft, because as a musician, you really do have to hone what you're doing. As a classical musician, your job is really to be the vehicle for the creative work that the composer has put together. And you really need a level of discipline and technical facility to do that successfully for the audience to really experience what the composer intended, what the composer has written on the page. Um, and the great thing about studying music, I found, was that there were lots and lots of opportunities. Um, and the one thing I have to say is amazing about studying classical music is that very early on you're thrown into almost professional situations with your mentors. So you play in concerts with people who are very established, very late career musicians, kind of from day one. And in many ways, even though there is a dynamic of, yes, you're being mentored, you're a young performer, and you're still learning the ropes, in the end the concert is a concert and you're creating music together and doing everything you can to work as an ensemble for the audience. So that's one thing that really sticks out to me about classical music study. And you get the chance to travel. I had the amazing experience of being able to play alongside Sydney Symphony Orchestra players, conducted by Sir Simon Rattle at the Sydney Opera House. I played at the G20 summit a few years ago and got to shake Obama's hand, which was very surreal. It's the kind of world that can really take you a lot of different places, and you meet a lot of people doing it. But there was something that I guess began to um, niggle at me. And it wasn't something I realized until much later on. And that is the realization that classical music is not very inclusive, and nor is it actually very creative. So, a lot of the gatekeepers when it comes to classical music performance and the classical music world are rich white people, basically. Um, and even though, when you imagine a musician, you think of them as being creative. When you're a classical musician, you're actually doing very little creating yourself. As a performer, you're really about the execution of somebody else's artistic vision. And that was, I think, a really slow, gradual realization. Um, and that's certainly not to say that classical music isn't amazing and full of artistic merit, and can be incredibly engaging and mean a lot of things to different people. But these things, I think, started to niggle at me. And I really luckily fell in with a bunch of people who were doing something a little bit different with music. I met the composer Chris Perrin, who was doing a PhD at UQ at the time, which is where I studied. And he was a math rock guitarist who decided that his way of creating music with his band was maybe slightly insufficient, because he wanted a level of complexity that wasn't possible without notated music. And so he decided to do a classical music composition degree so that he could notate music for performers with the level of complexity that he wanted to explore. And so I was really fortunate to be studying there at the time, and he sort of brought a few different players together, some from his previous life as a math rock guitarist, and some who were classical musicians who were studying at the university. And we performed some of his music. And what really struck me was that I was working with a living composer for maybe the first time ever. even though I'd been studying classical music for years and performing for years. I definitely had played music by living composers, but they always seemed like people off in the distance who were just as unreachable and you know distant as the old dead white European men who we mostly play in classical music. And working with Chris was really exciting because for the first time I was part of a really collaborative process and I had some creative input because even though he was a composer, he would come to us and say, look, I've written these charts. I think this sounds pretty cool, but also, does this feel comfortable to play on the violin? Does it sound good? If I'm looking for this effect, would you do something different? Should I make it higher? Should I make it lower? Um, can you show me with smooth bow strokes and with short bow strokes just so I can hear what it sounds like? So all of a sudden, I was actually part of a process of creating music where I actually was part of the decision making instead of just being told what I was going to perform and how I was going to execute it. So this was really quite a revelation for me. And not only that, it's not just the process that was different. The spaces that we were playing in were completely different. So this photo is from the Docking Station Studios in Maruka, which I'm not sure they're there anymore. But it was our first gig together. We did a little showing before the release of the piece that he'd written. And it was a small room with maybe, I don't know, 20, 30 people. Completely different to being in a big concert hall where the musicians are on the stage and the lights are down low so you can't even see the audience, but you know that there are hundreds of them out there. It's a completely different relationship between the performer and the audience. You feel much closer. You feel you can hear them respond as you play. You can sort of see them lean in if they're interested. And that was something that I really hadn't experienced so much when performing classical music. And so we started playing more gigs together. We found that we liked working as a group, so we kept sort of arranging things. And this one, another sadly gone Brisbane venue, the New Globe. I put this photo in because I think it was the first time I saw a photo of us playing and went, oh, I look like I'm in a band, not in an orchestra. I thought that was pretty cool. So I was still pretty naive back then, I think. And doing more and more of this non-classical violin playing, again, just like when I was playing violin, brought me to lots of different places and I met a lot of different people. This next photo is quite significant for me because I had the chance to play with Boy and Bear at the Tivoli, which is, for me, I think one of Brisbane's most iconic venues. And it's special not just because it was an incredible experience, but also because I met my partner that night. That's him on the saxophone out the front. And what really struck me about that night was when I came on stage for the first song, standing there in the back row, there's two violinists behind the band. The sound coming from the crowd was amazing and unlike anything that I'd heard, performing classical music. And obviously that's to do with some of the conventions around how you behave in concert spaces and in music spaces. But it's not just the sound, but the way people were engaging. It's not just about listening and going, oh, how nice was that piece of music, but it was, I don't know, something a lot more visceral, I think. When people enjoy music that isn't, you know, there's something quite academic about the appreciation of classical music that separates it from the appreciation of a lot of other forms of music. And that really made me think about why I was playing, because I'd never felt that sort of audience response before. And I know that audience response was not for me, it was for Boy and Bear, obviously. But still, to sort of see that happening in real time really made me think about why I was a musician. And I think what I sort of drilled down to was, it was because as musicians, we build connections. We're there to build connections with an audience. And while that's absolutely possible in classical music, you play a piece of music and it really moves somebody, it really, catches them at the right time. And there's something that the composer has written in that music that really speaks to an audience member. that totally happens. Um, but it did make me think that there were other forms of music making that I could find that sense of connection more easily than in classical music, and find that sense of connection with an audience that I felt closer to. Um, yeah, not just playing for the rich white people. And rather ironically, only last year, Ensemble ended up in Sydney performing in one of Australia's most iconic chamber music venues, where all the, you know, classical music's sort of star performers do perform when they're in Sydney. But we were there for a contemporary music festival that they were running. Um, and it struck me that I probably would never have ended up on that stage if I had stuck with playing just straight up classical music. But because I was doing something different, something that um, I guess melded different forms of music making and approaches to making art together, um, there I was on that stage. And, you know, here in Brisbane, I think we've had the opportunity to do a lot of performances that have strengthened our connection with Brisbane and the Brisbane community, like being asked by the Gallery of Modern Art to do some site specific work. Um, we got to play outside of the James Turrell, and they filmed us. You can look that up if you look up Ensemble and Goma. You'll find some videos from last year of the music that we performed in response to that work, and also the Margaret Ollie and just amazing, you know, being in those art spaces and responding to the visual art that was around us. Um, and so I guess my career path since study has really been a steady transition to a more inquiring, a more exploratory practice. Um, it's it's definitely not been a case of uh, doing what I was told in my study and seeing that career path and going for it. It was very much having opportunities come up and following what interested me at the time. Um, and I guess it's because when you're doing something for the first time that you're most aware and alert to your surroundings. The reason I was drawn to working with Chris and playing music by living composers and collaborating is because it wasn't playing Mozart for the fifth time that week. It's because I was playing notes that I hadn't heard before. I was given the option of playing notes that hadn't been heard before. Um, and that state of not knowing and being in the process of creating and in the process of absorbing what's around you and responding to it, I think is what we really want to seek out as creatives, because that's what makes us um, find things that other people haven't found before, or frame things in a way that people haven't um, considered. So I'd love, I guess, for you all to reflect on what you've been doing this year, especially with COVID, things that you've been doing for the first time. So, for example, have you set up a home office for the first time? Is it the first time you've worked from home? Is it the first time? Did you cook meals that you'd never cooked before? Um, did you, I don't know, interact with your friends and families using mediums that you'd never used before, and sort of appreciate, you know, for all the challenges, appreciate that sort of freshness of a different kind of communication. I think a lot of us have had experiences lately um, that are quite both challenging but really stimulating. Um, I never imagined that at work I'd end up producing online performances of musicians for schools from my home office. I never imagined up over here, whoop, wrong way, that way, that I'd, you know, head over to other artists' houses and build blanket forts and record podcasts in their home. Um, it's really been a really amazing time, and I think a lot of us have been doing things that are really different and things that are challenging and things that have really made us grow. And it's because we've been in this sort of transitional state, that we've been open to trying something different and doing something that we've never done before. I didn't imagine this year that I was going to form an experimental music duo with my partner and live stream gigs. Um, but that was a really amazing experience as well. And I don't know if you guys can see this comment. Actually, I'm going to try and move out of the way. There's a comment here. Um, it's probably too blurry to read, but we got one comment during the stream from someone saying, "I'm in hotel quarantine day 7, and this is food for my soul. Thank you." And that just was amazing, because I don't think if we had been performing live in a venue, I'm not sure that someone would have come up to us and said that. You know, people are usually very lovely at gigs, and they come up and say thank you, and they um, tell you what they thought. But I think sometimes on this online medium, because it's just a different way of communicating, there is openness, I think, to sharing, that is amazing. Um, so I would really like to encourage everyone, I guess, to be aware and also really enjoy being in a transitional state, particularly because of this year, and really notice its effect on your creative practice, rather than treating it as something that is an imposition and a challenge. Think of it as an opportunity to really do things, because nobody's written the handbook for this yet. You know, use that time of being your surroundings and what's happening around you to um, let that shape your creative practice a bit. Um, yeah, so I think that's kind of my reflection on the theme of transit. I hope that that was interesting and has brought up things for you to think about in terms of what you do.